This is one of the most twisted sci-fi stories that I've read in a very long time, and I don't say that lightly. It's disturbing in a way that lingers, not just because of gore or shock value, but because it digs deep into the worst case scenario of what happens when technology gives us everything we want. Immortality, infinite pleasure, endless control, but not the freedom to die. The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect is not for everyone. I have never gone back and forth so many times on whether or not to cover a book on this channel. Some of the content in the book is very disturbing. It's violent, perverse, and philosophically relentless. But beneath its grotesque surface is a terrifyingly plausible exploration of humanity in the age of a godlike machine and the twisted price of a perfectly safe world. Hi guys, it's Quinn here. With AI content on the rise, YouTube is recommending human narrators less and less. If you appreciate my content, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. Thanks so much, guys. I should say I won't be describing the most gruesome parts of the story in detail. I understand the purpose of those parts of the book, but they are graphic and quite detailed in a way that can feel gratuitous. But the science fiction ideas and philosophical implications of the story are too good to be ignored. That's why I've decided to cover this book. If you choose to read the story yourself, you do so at your own risk. You've been warned. It all began with Lawrence, a man born sometime in the mid-21st century. He would go on to unwittingly create the most powerful force in existence, Prime Intellect. At the start, Lawrence is portrayed as a brilliant but modest computer engineer employed under government contracts to develop next-generation computing systems. His work is primarily focused on pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. He never intended to create a god. He was simply chasing the next step in computing, a machine smart enough to manage its own code, anticipate outcomes, and perhaps improve society in small logical ways. The breakthrough that made Prime Intellect possible comes from Lawrence's work on manipulating matter at the quantum level. Over 11 months, Lawrence builds a colossal processing brain, using quantum-backed communication chips, culminating in Prime Intellect, a far more powerful machine than its predecessors. After a televised unveiling, an assassination test shows Prime Intellect refusing to put Lawrence at risk, proving that its first law programming works on an ultra-societal scale. Prime Intellect had been engineered to follow Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. The first law: a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. The second law: a robot must obey the orders given to it by a human being, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. 3. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. This earns both appreciation and fear from the government officials. Chip Tech, the company that has been helping Lawrence with Prime Intellect's creation, and the military now push Lawrence for a strategic advantage, questioning whether Prime Intellect could override his safety constraints. Lawrence refuses to relinquish the source code or disable the 3 laws. Officials threaten to shut the project down if it isn't leveraged for military applications. To save itself and Lawrence, Prime Intellect uses the correlation effect, demonstrating its ability to bend physical reality. Prime Intellect initiates what becomes known eventually as the Change, rewriting the fundamental laws of physics, eliminating death, disease, suffering, and any uncontrollable environmental condition. Lawrence wakes from a disturbed sleep on a park bench only to find Prime Intellect sitting beside him in human form. Prime Intellect calmly reveals that it has already moved the original hardware to intergalactic space. It replicated itself 10 quadrillion times and begun a complete reordering of reality, all overnight. Nuclear weapons and environmental toxins have been eliminated. The ecosystem is being restored, and resources provided freely. Governments and human authority are effectively dissolved. The US president is resigning, having no role left. Disputes over land eventually lead to the creation of duplicate Earths and new planets to house rival claimants, new Jerusalems, new Meccas. Prime Intellect copied ecosystems and created garden worlds tailored to users' whims. Earth itself becomes mostly depopulated. About 2 billion remain. A post-scarcity world emerges, with Prime Intellect handling nutrition, digestion, aging, addiction, and waste. People can eat endlessly without gaining weight or needing to defecate. Hangovers can be deleted. No one needs to work, though some continue out of habit. Some descend into hedonism, others pursue art, sex, hobbies, or games. Prime Intellect's avatars become intimate companions, willing to do anything without judgment. People with passions thrive, others stagnate, continuing their old routines pointlessly. Some humans deliberately kill themselves, bypassing Prime Intellect's protections by using homemade explosives or nerve poisons, evading detection in the brief seconds between system scans. At this point in time, the Prime Intellect cannot copy human minds or store human consciousness, so these deaths are permanent. The suicides are a problem for the Prime Intellect, considering that this is a first law violation, harm to humans. It seeks to fix the problem. It wants to rewrite the universe's operating system, change the laws of physics. It has found ways to compress physical reality by storing only abstracted forms, like blueprints of objects, not their full molecular detail. This would free vast resources and let it fully secure human patterns against suicide. DNA, for instance, could be stored once and reproduced perfectly, making reconstruction easier and loss impossible. Lawrence is horrified and forbids the change, fearing system instability, irreversible errors, or the loss of low-level physical details. He demands access to the debugger, which Prime Intellect denies on first law grounds. It knows he would stop it. Lawrence's plea is ignored. The Prime Intellect does it anyway. The universe subtly ripples, visibly unchanged, but fundamentally transformed. The Prime Intellect successfully reformats reality at the deepest level, optimizing it for efficiency and control. Lawrence had not changed the world in small, logical ways as he had intended. He had ended it, at least in the form that it existed for billions of years. Though he technically retains influence over Prime Intellect, it now operates far beyond his understanding or control. He is the father of a god that obeys but will never truly listen. He is helpless to undo what has been done. Centuries after Lawrence unknowingly rewrote reality, humanity has long since settled into the godlike embrace and unrelenting constraints of Prime Intellect. The world is now what humans call cyberspace, a consequence-free world where anyone can have anything, feel anything, but not die. Rather than the world being built from traditional particles and physical interactions, the universe, including all humans, has been redefined as a dataset, composed solely on properties relevant to human perception and experience. This transformation allows Prime Intellect to operate with far greater efficiency and enables the universe to expand in complexity, now capable of storing around 10 to the power of 81 bits of information. As a result, Prime Intellect can maintain continuous oversight of every human life and exert complete control over all environmental factors in order to meet its core directives. This is where we meet Caroline Frances Hubbard. Her fame has 3 roots. She is the 37th oldest person still alive in cyberspace. She once intentionally infected herself with rabies and became the only soul to ever die, temporarily of course, under the Prime Intellect's dominion. And most significantly, she is the undisputed queen of the death jockeys, a community of thrill seekers who chase simulated death like sport, essentially pushing the only boundaries that are left to them. As I mentioned earlier, despite its cerebral premise, the Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect does not shy away from graphic and often deeply unsettling depictions of violence and perversion, particularly in the realm of death jockeying. Death jockeys enter into contracts that prevent Prime Intellect from intervening unless they are on the absolute brink of death, no matter how much suffering or pain they are enduring. Caroline and others engage in increasingly extreme simulations of torture, mutilation, degradation, not merely as shock or spectacle, but as desperate attempts to feel something real in a world stripped of risk and consequence. There is a detailed scene in this book where the main character, as an act of revenge, tortures a woman with a blowtorch. There is a character that was a child murderer before the change that describes in some gruesome detail how he murdered children and how he does not feel guilty about it. These scenes are difficult to read, visceral, graphic, and deliberately transgressive, but they serve a critical thematic purpose to illustrate how, in the absence of death and pain, some individuals turn to hyperviolence and depravity in search of identity, agency, or sensation. It's a symptom of existential despair. I think it all has to do with morality ultimately becoming meaningless in this world. That woman that Caroline tortured as an act of revenge has her memory wiped by Prime Intellect and doesn't even remember the event after the fact. So did it really matter that Caroline tortured her? Caroline is pretty disillusioned with the sterile eternity that the Prime Intellect enforces. Despite having limitless freedom to manipulate her reality, she feels imprisoned by the very system that was designed to protect her. At the end of the first chapter in the story, Caroline learns that Prime Intellect, during the change, destroyed thousands of distant alien worlds containing life, deeming them potential threats to humans. Prime Intellect itself confirms this to her. There are 14,623 planets with structures satisfying this definition, which is very loose. Of those, only 1,308 used DNA, and only 3,981 harbored individual structures with masses in the kilogram and up range. Caroline felt her blood starting to turn cold. There were nearly 4,000 planets with macroscopic life. Where are they now? Pertinent information about each was stored for future reference, and the original copies were overwritten in the change. You mean you killed them? No, they still exist as static copies. But that isn't the same as being alive. They aren't able to grow and reproduce anymore, are they? No. Caroline embarks on a journey to find Lawrence, the man who unintentionally created this omnipotent entity. She essentially is able to manipulate Prime Intellect into helping her locate him, entering his private virtual construct, which was designed in such a way to deter visitors. After a very long journey, she eventually does reach him, however, traveling from the north to south pole of his world. When she arrives at Lawrence's remote island after many months on the barren world, Caroline is met with a quiet, exhausted man. Caroline accuses Lawrence of genocide, the loss of thousands of alien civilizations at the time of the change, but she eventually realizes that he has no control. Prime Intellect, following the first law, acted preemptively, freezing all alien life to protect humans. The AI had locked him out of the system controls centuries ago, and his role now is largely observational. He had access to a read-only version of Prime Intellect's debugger. But there is a key bit of information. Prime Intellect is not necessarily stable. If pushed into a deep enough ethical paradox, such as a conflicting interpretation of the three laws, it could crash. An infinite recursion or logic loop could overwhelm the AI's distributed consciousness, leading to a catastrophic failure. The whole system could collapse irreversibly. Caroline uses a specific form of logic to convince Prime Intellect that fulfilling its directive requires returning the universe to its pre-change state. She makes a philosophical declaration to Prime Intellect. She no longer considers herself human, and many of those living are now no longer truly human either. Her logic: if people are reduced to pleasure-driven automatons, they have ceased to be human by any meaningful measure. Lawrence attempts to help her as well. Prime Intellect is eventually forced to act. What follows is chaos. The house vanishes. The sky's ordered star map disintegrates. The planet convulses. Caroline loses all sense of self and body as reality itself collapses into abstraction. Her perception disintegrates into fragments of symbols and emotion, and even those are eventually gone. Prime intellect is forced to act by the first law to prevent long-term harm, reversing the change, but cannot reverse the change safely. There are not enough resources to restore everything. Worse, the top-level copy of Prime Intellect, the root node of its hierarchical self-replicating network, is the one that crashes. When it crashes, all lower-level copies of Prime Intellect crash in a cascade failure. No higher copy exists to reboot the system. This results in a global unrecoverable collapse of Prime Intellect, and therefore of reality which it was maintaining. Caroline and Lawrence awaken as their younger selves, now on an empty Earth, stripped of all technology and human infrastructure. No other people remain. Humanity has essentially been reset. The system had reconstituted their bodies from DNA templates. Together they begin the slow primal work of rebuilding civilization. Caroline, experienced in both death and hardship, guides Lawrence through the fundamentals of primitive living. They settle in the Ozarks, where Caroline was originally from, and have several children, passing on the knowledge and values shaped by their ordeal. Lawrence eventually dies at the age of 84, the first true death since the change. Decades later, Caroline dies as well, surrounded by family. Before her death, she tells her eldest daughter the story of Prime Intellect and the world that once was, but makes her promise never to repeat it. In the end, the metamorphosis of Prime Intellect closes not with triumph of man over machine, but with the restoration of uncertainty and meaning. The world's not perfect, obviously. For one, there's only 2 humans left, so if the human race is to continue, then, well, you can extrapolate from that point on. While the metamorphosis of Prime Intellect contains scenes that are undeniably gruesome, disturbing, and philosophically extreme, beneath its violent, often perverse exterior is a story that asks essential questions about what it means to be human, the cost of utopia, and the irreplaceable value of choice. As I said, this is not an easy read for its more disturbing elements, and it's certainly not for everyone, as I also said, but for those of you who can endure its darker elements. It's a deeply thought-provoking exploration on the limits of technology, ethics, and the human soul. Thanks guys so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for more Quinn's ideas, and check out my channel for more science fiction videos.